This time, after the US and Israel attacked Iran, Trump didn't just lose the shirt off his back, he lost the underwear too. And along with it, about a century of US Navy prestige got blown to pieces in the early hours of that morning in the Gulf of Oman. This whole thing happened so suddenly, and so embarrassingly, that the folks at the Pentagon probably still haven't processed it. USS Abraham Lincoln, the floating symbol of American dominance, left the battlefield for the Indian Ocean after the Iranian side asserted that 2 hypersonic missiles hit it. The United States Central Command has denied claims by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, that it targeted the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln with ballistic missiles, calling the assertion false. Still, it did not publish any evidence that the aircraft carrier was intact and still functional. The U.S. Central Command tweeted on March 2 that the Iranian regime's false messaging machine continues to falsely claim that it has sunk a U.S. aircraft carrier. Still, the truth is that the only carrier that has been hit is the Shahid Bagheri, an Iranian drone carrier. U.S. forces struck the ship within hours of launching Operation Epic Fury. Even so, there are tons of images and video clips on the internet showing Iranian ballistic missiles hitting the USS Abraham Lincoln. Although some of them were later proven to be fabricated, most people have not been convinced that the carrier was not affected and remained operable, as the U.S. Central Command asserted. As of now, we do not have proof whether the Iranian army hit the carrier, but the fact that USS Abraham Lincoln drove away from the battlefield reveals something unusual. Historically, whenever a U.S. president faced trouble, the first line was always, "Where are our aircraft carriers?" Well, now we have an answer. Mr. President, your aircraft carrier is running away for its life, trailing black smoke. The Iranian side told the following story, whether it is true or not, for reference only. It happened on the early morning of March 2, 2026. For Fatah, 2 hypersonic missiles went straight for the USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered beast supposedly protected by the almost mythical Aegis defense system. So what happened? It intercepted 2 of the 4 missiles launched. The other 2 slammed straight into the rear flight deck. Imagine 2 guys in a fight. One has been trained for years, mastered iron body kung fu, like Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan. And another guy, a nobody, walks up and cracks the kung fu master over the head with a brick. Aircraft carriers live and die by their deck and catapult system. The explosion punched through the deck. The launch system was not gone but paralyzed. Which means this multi-billion-dollar ruler of the seas, with astronomical yearly maintenance costs, instantly became a giant floating paperweight. Planes can't take off from it. Planes can't land on it. The U.S. side did not admit the carrier was hit. Still, the Pentagon spokesperson stuttered for a while and finally managed to say, dozens of sailors injured, and admitted the carrier was conducting a withdrawal, a better way to say it is running away. That's like getting your leg broken and insisting you're just trying a new walking style, arguing that hopping is also a kind of walking, even with one leg not touching the ground. Was that a tactical surprise? No, it was not. That was strategic dimension reduction. Iran basically told the world, your prized carrier strike groups, when facing hypersonic missiles, are just a thin-skinned, oversized target. That hole in the Lincoln's deck, whether it is real or not, wasn't just physical damage, but psychologically fatal for the U.S. It punctured the myth of invincibility. The current situation in the U.S. differs from Trump's original plan. The POTUS wanted a quick strike, a surgical operation to intimidate Iran and gain leverage. Even though the CIA warned earlier that removing the supreme leader of Iran would not initiate regime change, Trump started the attack with Israel to divert domestic attention abroad. Trump wanted to use the decapitation to force Iran back to the negotiation table for a better deal. Instead, Iran ignored the script. The 87-year-old supreme leader, his wife, his grandson, his other relatives and the country's high-rank military and government officials became martyrs, but Iran refused to surrender and retaliated fiercely. Before the U.S. had ever finished drafting its press release about the carrier incident, U.S. Central Command admitted that 3 American fighter jets had mysteriously crashed in Kuwait, saying they were mistakenly shot down by friendly fire. Kuwait's air defense did that, but it can hardly convince everyone. Many believe the Iranians attacked them. Iran clearly wasn't playing around. Reports say over 1,000 Iranians were killed and over 100 cities were affected by US and Israeli strikes. That kind of blood debt doesn't go unpaid. Meanwhile, the US tried the old playbook, media warfare and rumor spreading, a tactic employed by the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill multiple times during the Second World War. The US claimed former Iranian President Ahmadinejad had been killed in an airstrike. Ahmadinejad later showed up alive and energetic. That slap echoed. Trump saw the attack wasn't going to wrap up in a week, so he extended operations to 4 or 5 weeks. Still, he has not considered a ground operation yet. Is that his strategic patience, not starting land warfare? He is in a dilemma. Iran is not Venezuela. If he launched a ground war in Iran, it would be another Vietnam War or Afghan War. If he chose to stop now, the world would see through America's weakness. If he forced himself to continue, he would pour tons of money into a bottomless pit. Afghanistan cost the US $2 trillion, how much would Iran cost him? And Iran's counter-strategy is asymmetrical. On March 3, 2026, Iran's Revolutionary Guard struck Bahrain's Sheikh Isa air base. 20 drones. 3 missiles. Saturation attack. Command building flattened. Fuel depot burning red against the night sky. That's precision retaliation. Then, US embassies in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait faced drone attacks too. Iran's message was simple: the Middle East may be large, but there's nowhere left for US forces to sleep peacefully. The US can block ordinary missiles from Iran. How about hypersonic missiles? Even if the US can block hypersonic missiles, can it block swarms of cheap drones? The US is running out of Patriot defense missiles, worth $4 million each, and the US military cannot replenish them quickly. Even if the US can produce enough Patriot missiles, which it cannot, it is not cost-effective to shoot cheap drones with them. A Patriot missile is 100 times more expensive than a drone, and even an idiot knows the US should not intercept cheap drones with expensive missiles. And here's the key: even if the explosions happen in the Middle East, it's American soldiers dying and American taxpayer money burning. Although most of Iran's high-rank leaders were removed, the country's decentralized command systems still dealt the US and Israeli bases fatal blows. Every plume of black smoke is salt in Washington's wounds. Thousands of Americans are taking to the streets protesting Trump's undeclared war against Iran. Washington's major allies are standing by, refusing to join the war. Even its closest ally, Britain, wants Trump to prove his war against Iran is legal. Still, Iran's harshest move is to cut off the oil supply. Iran announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. That's the artery of global energy. Oil prices have gone vertical. For Europe, Japan, South Korea, and all oil importers, it is a disaster. And here's where it gets interesting. Europe didn't line up behind Washington. The UK, France, and Germany issued a joint statement saying, "We're not participating. You handle this on your own, Mr. President." The British Prime Minister even said publicly, the UK won't join. That's basically, boss, you've lost it. Don't drag us down. Because Europe isn't stupid. Why follow a lunatic into a war that wrecks their economy and invites retaliation? Iran is too close, and its missiles can travel long distances. And then comes the deeper layer. That may not just be military. It may be financial. It might be about the US losing the dollar hegemony. If Iran proves the US can't secure Middle East energy routes, what happens to the petrodollar system? If Washington can't guarantee oil flow security, why would Gulf states keep betting everything on the dollar? That's a multi-trillion-dollar question. So Trump has to project strength. Even if it's an expensive theater. Even if it's a gambler doubling down with borrowed chips. Europe sees this clearly. Their "Leave America Alone" moment wasn't just anti-war, it was hedging for a post-American era. They are also watching: if the US cannot withstand Iran's hypersonic missiles, can it still stop China's advancement in the Pacific Ocean? Now, let us see the military gap exposed here. The US relies on expensive platforms, such as carriers, stealth jets, and missile interceptors, which cost at least multiple millions each. Iran used hypersonic missiles and relatively cheap drone swarms. It is an asymmetric warfare. One interceptor missile costs $4 million. One military drone costs tens of thousands. If Iran uses civilian drones for military purposes, as Ukraine does, the price is even lower. That's like throwing gold spears at butterflies. And hypersonic speeds make traditional defenses look outdated. That is why USS Abraham Lincoln hastily fled the Gulf for the Indian Ocean. Even if it was not damaged by Iran's hypersonic missiles this week, it won't be lucky in the coming days if it stays within Iran's missile range. War is no longer about who has the bigger ship. It's about who wins the cost curve. And America's defense budget is already drowning in debt and inflation pressures. With nearly $39 trillion in debt and a shrinking military-industrial complex, who knows when the U.S. Navy will be broke and broken. For the current airstrikes, every extra day adds financial strain. If the U.S. aircraft carrier myth collapses, becoming white elephants, what happens to the entire naval doctrine? That's not just tactical, that's systemic. Just imagine America's 11 supercarriers suddenly becoming liabilities, instead of military assets. What an irony that is. The USS Abraham Lincoln, named after a president who symbolized the United States' unity and rise, is supposedly limping away under a cloud of smoke. Symbolism writes itself. It does not matter whether it is a damaged ship. Perception is always more powerful than facts. It's running away like a coward from the battlefield, which represents a shift in the era. The era where overwhelming military hardware guaranteed dominance may be ending. When power relies only on force, and that force loses its aura, decline accelerates. For quite some time, the world has said the United States is a declining superpower, and today it proves the world is correct. We said many times that Trump makes China great again, and he makes America weak again. What goes around comes around. When Trump's war becomes business, eventually the system changes. Washington's allies are not always stupid. They have learned how to follow interests, not slogans. The worst thing for the United States, however, is that the 80-year-old president is so impulsive that he is willing to risk the whole country's interests for something he deems correct against most people's will.